affection may be as clear as crystal and beauteous in its purity, yet it may be shallow because it has not been tested and tried. Make Christ first and last and best in everything, constantly beholding him, and your love for him will daily become deeper and stronger as it is submitted to the test of trial. In marriages, there will always be challenges. Always, always, always. I remember the first day after our wedding, I had challenges. It is not easy for two people, as alike as they may be, as similar in backgrounds as they may be, as perfect for each other as they may be, as led by God as they may be. They are still different people. And you have to make adjustments. And adjustment is always hard. When we went to the mission field, they told us the characteristic that is most important is adaptability. And I think the same thing is true for marriage. You need to be able to adapt to each other, and that takes time, and it often involves a little bit of friction. Ellen White says, though difficulties and perplexities and discouragements may arise, let neither husband nor wife harbor the thought that their union is a mistake or a disappointment. Determined to be all that it is possible to be to each other. Continue the early affections.
But that was in those days. Once I got, as a fisherman for a wife, once I caught you, what else do I need to do?
My father knew a couple that he counseled. My father was a pastor. And one day he was counseling this couple who was having difficulties. And he asked the husband, when did you last tell your wife that you loved her? And the man said, I told her that on the day I married her. And that was the last time.
He went on to say one more thing, though. He went on to say, that's good enough. I have told her that if I change my mind, I will let her know. And I have never told her otherwise.
Now, ladies, would you like a life with a husband where your husband never, ever said, I love you after you get married?
No.
No. So a big secret for the men in this room is that women need to be reminded constantly that they are loved. And for the men, what do they need?
It says in Ephesians 6, we need what? Respect.
I'm going to continue reading this paragraph. In every way, encourage each other in fighting the battles of life. Our life today is very stressful. Many of us in our homes, both spouses work. Your job is stressful, life is stressful, your in-laws are adding stress, everything is stressful. We need to encourage each other in our homes. Study to advance the happiness of each other. What did it say? Study to advance the happiness of each other. This is not something that happens passively. What we tend to do is we watch the movies and we see how everything goes just right, and we think it just happens like that. It doesn't. Things don't just happen. It takes work. It takes effort. When Herb began courting me, and it was a very long courtship, he would bring me flowers every Friday. Sometimes he would bring me flowers on other days, but he would bring me flowers for sure every Friday. What would have happened if he stopped that when we got married?
Thank you.
I would wonder what happened. Does he still love me? Huh? Praise the Lord. Every Friday, he has brought me flowers. 37, almost 38 years now.
Well, that's pretty good.
love her. Remind her the good qualities that she has. She will blossom the more you tell her how much you appreciate her and how much she is worth to you, how beautiful she is, how much you love her. Words are easy. Use them, men.
So Deuteronomy 24:5 says what? During that first year, make it your focus, intentionality, to bring happiness to your wife. And we hear, after that, continue.
But what happens in reality is many times after the wedding, everything is downhill, right? In many, many, many homes. After the marriage, everything is downhill. This is where God's counsel is so important. Ellen White continues here and says, if there is mutual love and forbearance and we continue the early affections, then marriage, instead of being the end of love, will be, as it were, the very beginning of love. The warmth of true friendship, make your spouse your friend. The love that binds the heart is a foretaste of the joys of heaven.
Some of us forget the Old Testament and we run right to the New Testament. Wives, submit yourselves to your husband, for this is right in the Lord. Let me ask you, wives or wives-to-be, how easy would it be for you to submit yourself to your husband if your whole objective in life is to make her happy? Is it easy or hard?
If the husband's objective is, what did you say?
Deuteronomy 24:5 says that my objective in life, in the first year of life, and you have said that we should continue the early affections, is to make my wife happy. Then
would it be easy for you to submit or not? If his whole objective is to make you happy, would it be easy to submit? Yes. Submission should not be hard.
That's when the rebel comes out in some of us and say, do I really want to submit to the stick?
Nobody likes force. And if we look at God, God gives everybody the power to choose for themselves. He does not force. And husbands should not force their wives. Wives should not force their husbands. One of the things that we forget in marriage is that even though the two become one, we are still individuals. And we should stay individuals. We should not force each other to change and become something we are not. God wants to use two people to show what the oneness of Jesus and the church is like. Each of us has something we bring to the marriage. When God gave Eve to Adam, he said he made her to help him. We can help each other and make each other better, but we should not try to change each other. Many of us, when we're courting or dating, whatever you want to call it, or when our parents are arranging our marriage.
There's a difference. In the West, we see that the idea of dating is very casual, and it's just to have a good time, and that good time may extend beyond certain boundaries. The idea of courtship is, I'm ready to get married, and I want to make sure, and I want to check you out. Are you good marriage material for me? Are we likely to do well together? So when Gail is using the word dating or courtship, she's using it synonymously, not like we typically are using it in the West and in the world. Okay? So there's we think we're ready. We are intentionally trying to explore. Will this work out? Is it God's will? Can God bless our union if we are to proceed to marriage?
And now I've forgotten my train of thought again, so we'll go ahead.
Your train of thought is almost here. Oh, you were trying to say that once a young man and a young lady are thinking about going to the altar, in her mind many times she's thinking, I'll alter him, I'll alter him, I'll alter him as they go down. And I can overlook and forgive anything now because one day I'll make him good. I'll alter him.
And you cannot change your spouse. You cannot change your spouse. The only person who can change your spouse is God. If you have thoughts of this guy is just right for me except for this, and this, but that's okay, I'll change him, forget it. You cannot change him. And you cannot change your spouse once you're married. What you can do is build your spouse up. And when you build your spouse up, he or she will become better and you will enjoy each other more.
Last week we mentioned that there are 4 components that that are blamed for marital breakups. What are those 4 points? In-laws. Finance.
Good. Sex.
Sex. And social media. Okay? We should keep these things in mind in a special way as we are progressing because it's so easy. Maybe my mother comes, or for some reason she comes to stay for some time, or we are in her home for some time. And why can't you do things right? And we see friction. And it can happen on many fronts in many ways. We talked about that a little bit about that last week. We don't want to go into that again. But that's a part of leaving and cleaving, as Genesis chapter 2, 24 and 25 is reminding us. So we need to take, and we men, if there seems to be something here where our mother seems to be, intervening and trying to improve our spouse and change her, make her a better spouse for us, we need to somehow find a way to protect our spouse from her. But that has the possibility of coming across as being rude, not loving mom or dad, not respecting them. But the good book says, the Bible says, that we should leave and cleave. That's emotionally, and therefore, if something comes up, even if it comes from our own families, from in-laws, it is our duty to protect our new home and to protect the darts that come in, even when they're well-intentioned.
And that is also true for the women. If your parents are disturbing your husband somehow, you need to protect your husband from your own family, okay? And you need to stand for your husband.
Now, number 2, back to money. You know, many of us, once we get married, it's something that especially the women and also the guys have looked forward to as the biggest and grandest day of their life, and we do everything to make it happen well. And the culture is there, society is there, the families are there, and it's supposed to happen, what? Well. And that usually means plenty of money.
And things.
And things.
Nice house, good furniture, big TV, car.
Let me suggest, you want to try and do all you can to avoid beginning a life together in a marriage relationship in debt. Even if it means doing something very, very simple. Even if it means, to a certain degree, society and culture, that they expect you to come and equivalent slaughter several cows, have a big feast, go into debt so that your grandchildren will be paying off that debt. Say, thank you. Please don't misunderstand me. Please don't misunderstand us. We can't afford it.
How much did the first marriage cost? Zero. And that is still possible today. It may not be practical for everybody, and if you have some money, sure, it's fine to spend it. if you don't have something that's a bigger need or a bigger priority to use that money for. But don't go beyond your means to have a grand wedding.
And once you're married, again, we should be pulling out scriptures here. Avoid debt like the plague. So minimize your debt as much as possible. Here in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 16, it says, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. And we heard yesterday that the fear of the Lord, in the context of someone having a relationship with God, means with a friendship of God.
If you come to our house in Valor today, there's a piece of furniture that we have in our dining room. That was one of our very first pieces of furniture when we got married. When we got married, I had a good job. Herb was still in school. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong word. He was still in university. And a couple of people asked about age differences. Yes, I'm older than him, but he wasn't in school when, when I was working. He was in university, and we are only 10 days apart, even though for a few days I'm a year older than him. But our first piece of furniture we still have in our home in Valor. And that was a piece of furniture that he picked up out of a trash bin on one of his morning runs shortly after we got married. Even if you have to not have much furniture and get furniture secondhand or like us out of a trash bin, it's not the things that make a home happy. It's Jesus that makes the home happy. And two people who build each other up, love each other, and respect each other. The amount of money you have, the number of things you have, will never give you happiness.
Reading the next verse, verse 17 in chapter 15, it says, better is a dinner of herbs or vegetables, where love is, than a fatted calf with hatred. And you know, men, if your wife is fixing food, one of the ingredients that you often don't think about or may not realize, which she usually puts in an abundant supply, is love. And somehow you can even taste the food if the love ingredient is there versus when it isn't there. But it says here, better is eating vegetables, herbs, with love than hatred with a fatted calf. And that's so easy to happen as well. Again, I'm just trying to emphasize, it's so much better to have happiness and joy with almost nothing, or maybe even nothing, where you can be supporting each other, than having a lot and having misunderstanding and not having the influence of heaven in your home.
I want to talk to the ladies here. Often the perception of the men is that we are the ones who want the big car, the fancy clothes, lots of shoes, the nice TV, and that is sometimes true, but it's not always true. So let your husband know that the most important thing for you is having him and having a happy home, so that he knows that. Otherwise, the pressure from society is really great on him and from his parents and from your parents and from everybody to get things and to provide lots of money. So make sure that he knows that you are okay, whether things are simple or better than simple. But having said that, Ellen White says something about things in a home. She says that men should provide labor-saving devices for their wives. You men have no idea until you are the one who stays at home and takes care of the house, and later the children too, how much work it is to take care of a home and children, especially when there's children, but even before the children. And if your wife spends all her time working, she's not going to have the energy or the desire to sit down and talk with you in the evening and share things. So if you have a little bit of money, one of your priorities should be to get labor-saving devices for your wife.
But Mrs. White didn't have those things in her days. She didn't have a mixie. You know, you had to grind the rice and make your flour. She had to do all these things by hand. If she didn't have it then, why should we have it today? Is that a good argument? Good argument? Because Muhammad did things this way, we will do things this way, still this way today. Because he wore this type of cloth, because he shaved in this particular way, because he...
Mrs. White said that every girl should learn how to drive a horse and carriage. We don't have horses and carriages today, so women don't need to learn how to drive anything.
So,
my father took that statement and said, not only do my daughters need to learn how to drive, they need to learn how to change the tire before I give them the keys to my car.
and when our daughters went to college, one of the first classes they enrolled in was a class in auto mechanics. So they would know how to fix their car.
And that was because in Africa we had cars that were always breaking down and their mother didn't know how to fix them. So they said, we're going to do better, we're going to know how to fix cars.
But when my oldest daughter's engine went out and she was told that she had to have a new engine to put in the car, she went to see how much the engine would cost, how much it would cost to have a mechanic do the work. She says, that's too much money, I don't have it. So she did it herself. She had a couple of her friends that helped her with different parts, but she did it herself. We men, we need to find ways that not only are we able to help our women with labor-saving devices and make their work as easy as possible, but also to help improve them where they are interested and where it will help them in their different aspirations in our service to God together. We need to invest in our women. Let me ask you, this little device, has this increased or decreased our work? Has this thing increased or decreased our work? Oh,
For
please.
me, it has increased my work.
It's true. It makes a lot of work easier, but it seems like the work that has become easier is now more and more and more, and it's easy to drown in all the work and the expectations that people have from us. So
Before, I used to have to type a letter. That was, or even before that, I would write a letter. Now it's so easy with WhatsApp, with email, whatever. But before, I used to have to answer maybe 1 or 2 letters in a week. Now I get hundreds of messages every hour, it seems like, that need to be attended to. So I think really in the long run, this has increased at least the time we spend thinking we have to do something.
So where it is possible and realistic, make investments to make work easier.
So let me give you an example. If you have enough money to get a washing machine, buy a washing machine for your wife. If you have enough money to get a mixie, buy a mixie for your wife so that she doesn't have to chop everything by hand or pound it in a grinding stone or whatever. Those are the types of things we're talking about here.
Let's move on. Time is sprinting away. Now it's coming time where we want to have kids. And typically what happens is we just come, we meet, and we expect everything will happen by default. You know, it's fascinating. that your affect, your emotions, what you eat, your exercise and activity level, what you watch, all will play a bearing on the child you will have. In the past, when we would read these kinds of things in Ellen White, what does this old lady know? And then I began to discover and understand a new field of medicine which has come up, but maybe the last 30 years, called epigenetics. Someone says, my wife says, Herb is always angry. I see it's in my genes. My father was angry, my uncles were angry, my grandfather was angry. I can't help it. Right? Again, Mrs. White reminds us that God can help us to overcome inherited and cultivated deficiencies or tendencies in our life. So there's hope for all of us. But the other aspect is, so genetics is something that will pass down to the next generation, correct? And can I change my genes? No. Now what does the word, the prefix epi mean? Epi. Anybody know Greek? Epi. What? Above. Upper layer. Good. Upper layer or above. In the field of epigenetics, we are discovering that the way I live, the way I think, the way I act can affect my gene expression. Which means that if at the time before conception, because how long does it take sperm to make in the body, in the men's body? How long does it take? It takes about, 120 days for the sperm to be created? 90 days? Okay. 90 days for the sperm to be created? Whatever it is, okay? Some may be faster, some may be slower. I need to revise. That's fine. And then the baby will incubate in mom, typically for around 9 months. What we discover is that what the husband is doing beforehand, there's
what he eats, how he exercises, how he sleeps, his emotions.
All of these will have some effect on my sperm. There's a lot more study that has been done on women, but the studies are beginning to come out on men. So that during pregnancy, if a woman is always anxious, maybe she's always angry, those tendencies will be passed on to the baby. Now, think about this for just a moment. With epigenetics, there is a way that the positive influences can turn off the bad genes. And there's a way where the negative influences can turn on the bad genes in an even stronger way. Let me practicalize this. If I'm going to go ahead and eat plenty of fast foods, that will help to turn on the negative genes. If I'm always angry and I'm uptight, I'm under a lot of stress, that will also turn on the negative genes and have those traits more easily passed on. In our world, which is becoming more fast-paced, more high-stressed, and more troublesome on so many accounts, our children have no chance unless you are a person who has God as your friend, so that you can sleep at night. You can give Him your stress. Say, God, I don't understand why this is happening. I'm giving this back to you. Help me do the best I can, and help me to be the witness you want me to be, and a happy person.
Yeah, and in spite of all the troubles going on around us, keep a song in your heart and even express it, sing.
So,
those things will help your baby.
Now, let's say that these things are happening. I mentioned it affects the men as well. We've studied it much more in women. And these traits get passed on in the genes to the baby. as that baby is developing in mom. Now, if mom is going to has a girl, what happens? That baby girl that's developing in her womb ends up having all of the eggs in her ovaries when she's born that she will have in her lifetime. Which means that you are really affecting the next generation as well, your grandkids. Are we together? When I began to appreciate and understand this, I then began to say, is this what the Bible is talking about in the second commandment? That when I have other gods before me, that God will visit the iniquities or the tendencies to continue in cherished sin to the third and the fourth generation? So it's not some act of viciousness against that God has given us. He's giving us the reality of biology as how He has made it. In the same way, if I have those inherited tendencies and I allow God's Spirit and a positive lifestyle to come in, I can dampen those characteristics in the next generation as well. So epigenetics is a fantastic field, which a lot more will be coming out, but it is amazing how it not only affects me, not only affects the next generation, but we discovered it can affect me too. So that in fact, if my uncles, my father, my mother, they all have diabetes, or they all have heart disease, if I change my lifestyle, it can make a much stronger impact, and I can turn off those tendency genes, and so that those genes are the gun pointed into my head. But my lifestyle is what pulls the trigger. An amazing study was done some time back in a lab that was studying what happens to rabbits when they're given cholesterol to eat and they're already bred to have heart disease. They wanted to find out. And so as they were doing this study, the researcher was confused because the study all came back mixed. Nothing made sense. They did the study again, and they had the same mixed results, and they couldn't figure out why they got results from all over the spectrum. And as they began to analyze and ask more questions, they discovered they had a young lady who had just joined the lab, and she was a lady who was very positive. With these, early in the morning, she would pick up each rabbit and talk to them and pet them and hold them and caress them and tell them what fantastic rabbits they were. And then throughout the day, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, oh, nice rabbit. And then in the evening before she would go home, at lunchtime, she'd spend another few minutes. Evening before she goes home, she would caress them and talk with them again and say, wonderful rabbits. It turned out that those rabbits that this young lady, this new lab assistant, was in charge of, they had 60% less atherosclerotic streaks on their aorta. When did we ever think that being loving, being kind, being tender, spending time has therapeutic health benefits? We always think, eat right, exercise, etc., etc., etc. But how often do you hear, be kind, treat them well? It makes a big difference.
So when we get married, we should not wait until we have children to make the culture of our home what it should be. When we get married, from the very beginning, we need to set the tone of our home. That means having family worship before children come. Having individual personal worship too, but then having family worship. Deciding on your traditions. What are you going to do to celebrate Sabbath? How are you going to make Sabbath special? Ellen White says, Sabbath should be made the most special day of the week in the home. And that should happen before you have kids, but especially after you have kids. But in order for it to happen after you have kids, you need to have started that tradition early. So you need to set the tone of your home early on. Talk with your spouse. decide, how do we want our home to be? What kind of music do we want in our home? Where do we want our home? Do we want it in a really noisy neighborhood, or do we want it somewhere peaceful? Now, it's not always possible to choose exactly where you have your home, but do your best to set the atmosphere, because even the atmosphere of the home will have an impact on your marriage and on your children's lives. And then kind words, caresses. Be kind to each other as husband and wife. And then be kind to your children. Love your children. You cannot say, I love you too much. You will not spoil your spouse by saying, I love you too much. They won't get proud and big-headed. They'll just get better and better the more they feel loved. Okay? And then the same thing with children. You cannot spoil your children with love. You can spoil your children with other things, but not with love. And love will change their life both physically as well as emotionally and socially and in every other way.
Another part that is important to talk about ahead of marriage, but then really make sure that it's applied early in marriage, is what will you do with the media? Are you going to be having a television in every room, like is in many houses in the West and in India, or have so much screen time, or are you going to minimize that?
We decided in our home, actually even before we got engaged, we talked about this, and we decided that we would not have a television at all in our home. We're not saying that's what everybody has to do, but
or that we will do that all our life?
That was the decision that we made. I was so happy about 5 years ago. Our youngest daughter, who's now in her 30s, called me up and she said, Mom, thank you so much for not having a television at home. I was surprised to hear that from her, but happy that it was a positive thing in her life. So you need to decide what you're going to do with that, and as you read these books that we've recommended, it will help you to make those choices.
We may come back and forth a little bit, but we'll run on because the clock is not standing still. In Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he will go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I had planned, and somehow it slipped. I was going to bring my PVC pipe that we used last week and as a stick, because another text says, spare the rod and spoil the child, right? Let me ask you, as we train up a child, what will make that child positively remember the way he was brought up? If at every turn, if the child is doing something that I don't like, I'm going to beat you. Or maybe I will actually strike. Will that be a happy home? But the Bible says, spare the rod and spoil the child. I was impressed, and even some of this impression really came strong to me this morning as we were thinking about sharing. This text, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, what will he do? I find it impressive that this story is played out in one of Jesus' parables in Luke 15, what we often call the prodigal son. He had everything, and he wasn't satisfied with home life. He was rude and improper, took what he could, and went off and spent it in a foreign place. But as he was feeding pigs, he got to thinking, you know what? Back at home, it's different. Now let me ask you, typically, we often think of, who is the softer, kinder parent? Dad or mom? Okay. For girls, dad. For guys, mom. Huh? Is that what it is? But notice, this was a guy. And so he tried to create a speech for his dad. And I can't help but think and be reminded of some of our other texts here. Where in Ephesians 6:4, it says, fathers, don't exacerbate. No, that's the word. Don't provoke your children. That's so easy for us to do. To anger. Colossians 3:19 says the same thing again. It's easy for us men to be sometimes even abrupt and dogmatic and lay down the law. This is it. I wonder if that was the picture the prodigal son had, would he have come back home? Here we seem to see the picture of a father who was nurturing early on. And when he was old, what did he do? He remembered his earlier training and came back home. The text doesn't say they won't become wayward, but they can't forget the love and the care and that home environment that they had.
And let me just say, there's a difference between permissiveness and showing love. Okay? Permissiveness means there's no rules, no boundaries, no anything. You just let your child do whatever they want.
That's what the world is teaching today.
But the Bible makes clear we need to train our children. When you train a grapevine, what do? You tie it, little piece at a time, and train it to go the way it should go. That's not a harsh treatment. It's a very gentle treatment. You just tie it up and it trains it to go. God trains us. How does he train us? Through circumstances, trials sometimes, and those are hard. Sometimes we do need, as parents, to maybe use corporal punishment. I had a very, very, very good father, and he was definitely not the softer side of the family. But as a daughter, I was closer to my father than to my mother, even though my father was not the softer side. That didn't mean my father was harsh. My father was not harsh. But if I was going to get an actual corporal punishment, a spanking, it was usually my father who administered that. Before he would punish me, he would talk to me, and I would know exactly why I was getting punished and how sad he felt that he had to punish me. And he would tell me that he loved me. And then he would punish me, and then he would pray with me. And the prayer was the worst part of it all. Not because his prayer was bad, but that was what made me feel really, really, really bad about what I had done. Ellen White cautions us as parents and says, never discipline in anger. We're not going to prescribe the type of punishment you use for your children here. But I will say, please, 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 never punish your children in anger. I have done that, and it was a huge mistake and had very, very, very negative effects instead of the positive ones that I was hoping for or punishing for. So just be sure that the rules in your household are clear. Ellen White also says the rules should be few and well understood. So ahead of time, your children need to know what the rules are. And they should know what the consequences are. And then be consistent. If they break the rule, first time they get the correction. But usually what happens is this. Herb, why did you make that big mess? Why? Go clean it up. Herb, go clean it up. Herb, I told you, go clean it up. I'm going to beat you. Right? So, or we say, Shinish, come. You're too obedient. Don't come. Shinish, come. Shinish, come. Shinish, I'm going to not let you have any sweets all week. Come. And then what happens is we forget that we told him he's not going to have any sweets this week. And he gets away with not coming. And he gets sweets. So what has he learned? Obedience isn't important.
And he can defy you. It doesn't matter.
So the key to training your children is make it loving. Help them be informed ahead of time. Make few rules, but let them know what the rules are and expect them to keep those rules. And then be consistent. If they break the rule, immediately they get to the consequence. Doesn't matter.
Not when we get home, or not tonight or tomorrow.
When it happens. Huh? When it happens, because there needs to be a connection in the child's brain between the infraction and the punishment. But too many times there's not that connection, and then children are being abused because they're being punished and they don't know why.
Physically,
That's
emotionally,
not training.
mentally abused.
Mm-hmm. Make sure that you never punish in anger. And that is only possible with God's help. Only possible with God's help. So that is something you need to pray about. You can start praying now as young people who aren't married, that God will help you to develop patience and kindness and love, even towards people that provoke you. Because if anybody is going to provoke you, it will be your spouse and your children. Those are the ones who will provoke you the most. Okay? It's not somebody out on the road who's likely to provoke you. It is the people closest to you, and that's your spouse and your children. And we need to respond the way Jesus responds. Welcoming us with love and not beating us over the head.
The book of Hebrews says that God disciplines those he loves. Does it say God disciplines those that make him annoyed, that make him angry, that make him unhappy? But so often we discipline because for our own ego, our own pride, our own self-image, and it isn't necessarily out of love. The word discipline comes from the same root that the word disciple comes from. So the real idea of discipline is, how can I disciple the next generation to be like me? And so when...
And that brings up another important point. It's what we as parents do.
Just like we saw yesterday.
That will do the
Tap your cheek.
Do the biggest training of our children. If they see us be kind and loving to each other, they will be kind and loving to their siblings. If they see us shouting, they will shout. If they see us in the morning having morning worship, they will develop that habit.
And they will even go and find a Bible and sit, and if they've heard their mommy or daddy sitting and reading out loud, they will make noises as if they're reading too.
Even very, very young children who can't talk yet will do that. Children are like parrots. They mimic everything. They mimic everything they see. So in your home, your biggest job is being who you want your children to be. And that is much harder than taking a rod and hitting somebody. But that is much more important than abusing your child.
So dads, how will your son, your daughter, who's 2 or 3 years old, know that you love him or her? There are many answers that can be given, but Lavanya in the back is saying that our time is soon up. Many of us, when we do something, we give them gifts, which I call bribes. Or we do other things.
Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. I'll give you a sweet afterwards. Huh?
But probably the strongest message that dad loves their small child is the way their child sees how dad treats their mom. So how the child sees dad treating mom is one of the greatest indicators that the child knows, I am loved.
One of the most important things for children is to have security, to know that they are safe, to know that mom and dad love them, to know that mom and dad are not going to disappear. In this day and age, most children don't have that security because they don't know that dad loves mom and that mom loves dad. They see mom and dad fighting all the time, and in their little brains, that means danger. What's going to happen if the people that provide for me disappear?
Especially when they see that in their fellow mates in primary school. One parent, another parent isn't there.
So again, one of the most important things in developing our children is showing love for our spouse.
One of the greatest things that God ever said about child rearing was to Abraham, whom he called his friend 3 times in Scripture. He said, I know this man will train his household to follow me. And that is what we're looking for today, is how can we be training our household more effectively? How can we plan, strategize, and think prayerfully? How can I help my household follow God more completely? And our children do it, as Gail said, by modeling. If we model it and we enjoy it, they will want to be a part of that.
That was a beautiful ending, but I'm not going to let you end there because we've forgotten a really, really important component. Home should be joyful. Home should be a joyful place. That should be a child's favorite place to be. In fact, one of the best things you can do as a parent is to make home the place your children want to bring their friends to instead of going somewhere else. And that means mom and dad have to do some things and spend some time with their children, because children won't be happy if you don't spend time with them. What children want from you more than any gift is your time. So dads, when you come home from work, I know you're stressed, you're tired, get a ball, go outside and play ball with your children.
Or do some other activity.
Take
Work on
a
the
walk.
car, take a walk, show them in nature what lessons they can learn from God's goodness and greatness.
But do things that the children consider fun. My father was a very, very busy pastor, union worker, division worker, and often traveled a lot. But whenever he was home, every afternoon he would do something special with us. That might be taking us to the park to ride our bicycles, or it might be taking us to go swimming. every afternoon, and it was only after I became a parent that I realized how difficult that is. And I told my dad, I am so grateful for the sacrifices you made for my sister and me, because it made a huge difference in our lives. And as a family, we did have fun. And as a family, we did want our friends to come to Mom and Dad's house. Mom would have good food, special treats for our friends.
And the friends loved to come.
They did. We would play games together outside. We would build things together outside. I remember once we pretended we were American Indians. Now, I was not raised in the U.S. I had only read about American Indians. But I taught all my friends what American Indians were like, and we played American Indians. Had a wonderful time, and Mom was out there with us. She made special things that we could enjoy in our teepees that we built. And so make your home a place filled with joy. Because if it's not filled with joy, Satan will be there and you will lose your children.
So what we've heard here is there's a component of hospitality. And we see that in the life of Abraham and many others, and that God's people are hospitable people. It may even mean that they encourage and invite their children to invite the neighbors over, or that their children are free to bring the neighbors over and to do the things that they want to do. That there's involvement in the social arena, in the community, so that when there's projects to be done, there's ministry to do. Do it with your kids. You know, I'm just like we heard last week about giving Bible studies and going door to door. If your children are a part of that, they'll grow up as that being part of their culture. And
do things as a family. Go to church together as a family. Do outreach as a family. If one of you wants to go and pass out literature, let the whole family go and do it, and make it fun. Make it an exciting thing.
And if the kids want to bring their friends, let them come. Remember, 2T22. What did I say? 2T22. 2T, 2 Timothy 2:2. The idea is, Paul told Timothy, you find those whom you can teach, who can teach someone else. I like 2T22 because it reminds me that we should be thinking about multi-generational discipling. How can I not only be discipling my children, but how can I be working with my children and encouraging them as they disciple their friends and as they disciple others? So we have multi-generational discipling. It's not just the old people who are being discipled, but down through. And when all of this happens, our prayer for you and for us comes from Isaiah chapter 8:18. It reads here, here am I. So when we come before God, when there's a second coming, and we all want to go to heaven together, we can say, Isaiah 8:18, here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel. I will tell you that if you have kids that are obedient from when they're very small, they're joyful, they're happy. Your home is an influence for heaven. It's a little heaven on earth for the community. Everybody knows that. Your kids, your home, will be a sign and wonder in your community. That's our prayer for each of us. You want to close with prayer? You want to close with prayer?
Let's pray. Father, thank you for the gift of love. Thank you that you love us. Thank you that you've made us part of your family. And thank you that you give us the chance to have families and enjoy what it's like to be united, just like we should view the joy of being united with you. Thank you for the homes that you've given us. Some of our homes are not what they should be. I pray that in a special way you be with the homes today that instead of having joy, have bitterness and sorrow and weeping. Help the people in those homes to know that you are there for them. And that though you won't by force change their spouse, that you are willing to change them and make them a light in their home. Thank you for the homes where there is joy. And I pray, Father, that you will make more and more of our homes bright lights for you, so that people will see that there is something that they want, something different. Thank you for the instructions you've given us. Help us to learn and make changes in our own homes so that they will be even better lights for you. And again, we thank you for the joy of being part of your family. In Jesus' name.